I have not always had the words to advocate for myself, specifically in the workplace. I have buckled under the pressure to exude the magic that Black women are said to possess. Calm down. This is not witchcraft, it is poetry. Let the wordplay rock. And success, well, a friend asked me a few weeks ago, what is your definition of success? And I drew a blank. See, I have embarked on the road to deconstruct this false narrative of success. But the reconstruction? Well, that's still under construction. I talked about these things and so much more with Niki Adebiyi. It is a conversation I know you will enjoy. Here to edify. 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 Well, hello. I am really, really excited to sit down and talk with you today. One of the reasons why this is extra amazing is because we are in completely different countries. And so you're taking the time, with all of the time difference to sit down. So I'm excited to talk about what you're doing. So to give everyone kind of a quick setup, we met through mutual friends, and you recently launched what is called Bounce Black. And as I have been following it both on social media and online, it's almost crazy how cathartic it is that everything that you're putting up and posting just feels so relevant. And we'll talk more about it, but on the surface, it's talking about mental health, and that is a term that it's a like one of those terms that now it's common. We hear it a lot. But like I said, there's just something about Bounce Black that speaks to me specifically. And I think as you elaborate on your story, we will probably explore why that is so. In lieu of all of that, we will jump right in. And I'm going to actually start with a quote from your intro blog to Bounce Black, and we will go from there. So it starts, the idea of Bounce Black has been years in the making, as in many ways, I am my target audience. So just quickly, I want to say what really stood out to me was I am my target audience. I felt that was just bold to just live in the truth of, look, I'm talking to me. I'm speaking to me and acknowledging that there are others that are going to be able to relate to this. And so even just the courage to be able to say, I am my target audience really spoke to me. And so from there, my question is, what is the story behind Bounce Black? Tell me all about it.
First of all, thank you so much for that incredible introduction. It's such a huge honor for me to be a guest on this show. Oh my goodness. Yeah. And it's even crazier that we're in completely different time zones while doing this, but exciting. So yeah, the story of Bounce Black. First of all, I should say, for anyone who isn't aware, Bounce Black is my latest project, which is a community for Black students and graduates and professionals who are navigating mental health and trauma recovery while trying to build or manage a career. And the story behind that really is, as you've already kind of alluded to in my blog, is it's born out of my own lived experience of struggling with those things, struggling with my mental health throughout my education experience, from school to university. It got progressively worse. And as much as mental health has been increasingly a conversation at the social level and across the globe, really, it's becoming more of a talking topic in public, and I'm grateful for that. But it wasn't always that way, and I'm I'm old enough to still be somewhat part of the generation that didn't talk about those things at the point at which I would have needed them to kind of prevent the crises that I experienced. So yeah, it was born out of my lived experience of struggling through depression and anxiety. And I have experienced 2 mental breakdowns by the age of 25, and I'm hoping to not like break that achievement. Hoping those will be the last, but I wanted to make sure those experiences didn't go in vain, because it has been a huge challenge for me to get to where I am. And the reason why it's both students and professionals is, as much as my recovery process began a long time ago, it's still a challenge to figure out how to navigate recovery whilst being in work and whilst building a professional identity. And so when I say I am my target audience, I kind of I questioned whether to put it that way, because I wanted it to be clear that it's not, the mission isn't about me. It kind of starts with me and from my experience, but it's not all about me. But even so, I felt it was important for me to be honest that I know there is a gap here, in this specific way, because I fell through the gap, and because my experience was so difficult, I don't want anyone else to unnecessarily have to go through those things again. And so, yeah, that's when I say I am my target audience. It's because I know that there are significant obstacles, I think, for people to pursue recovery and also progress in their careers. So I just want to bring together people who are having similar struggles and trying to figure this thing out. Maybe they don't even know that they don't feel safe in the world, they don't feel safe in their bodies, and they need that sense of belonging to ground them in their bodies and to root them in this present moment, and to encourage them to move beyond living in survival mode and just motivate them, so they can see that your struggle isn't the end, and it doesn't have to be a crisis. Mental health crisis doesn't have to be inevitable. It doesn't have to be irreversible. There are ways to manage it, to make sure that you can still move forward in life. And so I'm just trying to bring people like that together and just say, you know what, you're not the only one going through this, and your dreams are still valid. I think that's the most important thing for me. Not just encouraging people to pursue recovery for their health, but to realize that they still have something to offer to the world, and to kind of, it's my hope to be a living example of that. Yeah.
It makes me think when I look at what you're doing, and you kind of alluded to it in the blog, and we'll, towards the end, we'll tell everyone where they can find Bounce Black. But what you are doing is you're allowing people to give a name to something that oftentimes we go through. The hard part is we don't have a name to put to it. The mental health piece is its own chunk, but then you have just being able to arrive at the point of saying, I am struggling mentally. And so I think that it is a beautiful thing that you're also cultivating a space of, here, let's name it. It does have a name. And I wanted to know, in the spirit of naming and talking about putting a name to it, did you ever feel extra burdened to be able to name something? Because as Black women, which I talked about in another episode, this burden of strength, like you have to be strong. There are many people looking at you, whether they're aware of it or not, that the expectation is that you would push through. Was that something that you struggled with in order to get to this point of even saying, one, I'm naming my struggle, but then two, now you have Bounce Black that is allowing others to do the same?
Yes. I think I definitely had, on an individual level, I had a reputation for being strong. And I definitely felt a pressure to keep that up, because, most of the time people came to me for advice on how to manage their mental health or help someone else, off the back of the brief moments of vulnerability that I had here and there. And then that turned into an entire reputation of just getting on with it and persevering in the face of very, very difficult things, which to some extent I still kind of do, but it looks a lot different from me now. I think while there were people who tried to help me in different ways at various points in my journey, for the most part, I took on that role of the advice giver or the mother type friend. So I felt like I had to maintain that sense of strength because I didn't want to be a hypocrite. Like I wanted to encourage people to keep going, so I had to keep going myself. But honestly, in hindsight, sometimes I wish someone just told me it was okay to just stop and breathe and, just sit there and try and unpack everything that's going on, because I was just feeling and feeling and feeling, but also suppressing and suppressing and suppressing. And that was terrible for my health. It destroys you from the inside out when you suppress your emotions. And I didn't have the emotional vocabulary that I have now, thanks to reading books like Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score. Changed my trajectory and helped me better understand my body and my experiences. But prior to that, I thought emotions were the enemy. And yeah, I just was very, very determined to pursue strength, pursue goals at all costs. And over time, it did cost me. So yeah, I would say I definitely subconsciously was aware of that expectation, the burden of strength, as you put it. And you can kind of even hear it now, because I'm more aware of myself. You can hear it in how I talk about it, and the heavy sigh that just came. It's still something that I'm working through. So I'm by no means complete. I'm still a work in progress here. And I'm trying to allow myself more often to not have to be strong all the time, because I feel like no one can be, or no one should be, because our humanity consists in experiencing the full range of our emotions, and I don't think we should cut ourselves off from that, even if it's uncomfortable.
It excites me to hear these things because it is so true. And again, this is what speaks to what just allows me to be like, oh my goodness, this is what I'm going through. This is exactly what you're saying about the suppression and how, this idea that emotions are the enemy and how false that is and unhealthy that is, and the understanding that in the fullness of us being human beings, the gambit of emotions is part of that fullness. And so, yeah, I think that is, yeah, it's just great. So you wrote, all the stories of Black excellence I saw didn't look or sound like me. Sometimes I saw the kind of small victories I celebrated disparaged as mediocrity online. I felt excluded, utterly hopeless, and alone in what I was going through. I decided to build a table for people like myself. Again, the beauty of that is the building of a table for yourself, but then also, which honestly could lend itself to a whole nother conversation we won't have, but this is building another table in lieu of the fact that you're not fitting into the other instances of Black excellence. Because a lot of times when we hear a seat at the table, it is in, or I'll say in my American context at least, it's this Black-white divide. But understanding that, like, no, there's a divide even in our own community. And so being able to, again, I feel like this is going to continue to come up, put a name to, and have the boldness to say, hey, I want a seat at a table even within my own community, that this is not less than because it doesn't look like this Black excellence, but it is still Black excellence. And so, yeah, my question for that was, what is your definition of success, or even how has your definition of success been shaped through coming to this realization?
So it's funny because I've recently been reflecting on Black excellence a bit more deeply, because in the past week or so, I put out an article series for HBCU week, because I was curious. I've always wanted to go to HBCU, and I think lots of people can share that sentiment, even Black British people like myself. And so I was curious about their experiences because I've been to, my university was predominantly white, but it was diverse in many ways. And still I felt that sense of pressure to meet that Black excellence standard. And I read essays like The Talented Tenth by W.E.B. Du Bois, and things like that really, really shaped my sense of self and my sense of identity and purpose in my late teens, early 20s. Yeah, around that time. And so I was curious, what is it like to experience Black excellence culture in a on a Black campus environment? Like, to me it sounds like both the most amazing thing and possibly also the most daunting thing. And so I reached out to some people in my network and my friendship group and asked their experiences, because I knew quite a few people who have been to different institutions. And it was really interesting to read their responses, because a lot of them said the same things that I have felt, which was very, very comforting, in that a lot of the Black excellence narrative up until now has been very, very, it's very stringent and narrow in its outlook on success. Like some of the examples that I gave in the article were things like, if you graduate at the top of your class, that's considered Black excellence. If you are on the board of like a Fortune 500 company, or if you have your own 6-figure successful business, things like that have traditionally, historically, one of those words, been the way of conceiving Black excellence. And that was what I strove after myself, but it didn't prepare me to deal with failure. It was part of, and it reinforced a fixed mindset. Shout out to Dr. Carol S. Dweck, Stanford psychologist. I love her mindset theory. But yeah, a fixed mindset is someone who sees ability in terms of something you either have or you don't. There's no real room for growth and development over time and learning from failure and seeing it as part of the process. And so because I had that kind of mindset, when I started experiencing failure in a way that I wasn't used to, it was very, very destructive for me. And so it was both a cause and effect of my mental health crisis. And so since that time, being now on the other side of that recovery journey, and I'm still in recovery in many ways, but I've mostly recovered from the things that I was struggling in the past. It's definitely caused me to reflect on what I root my identity in. And I had to realize that it was heavily intertwined with, it was both other people's idea of success, but it was also mine at the time. Like, I can't even lie, I believed in the talented 10th. I wanted to be part of that Black elite who, you know, the woman who does it all. I wanted to be that kind of woman. But I started to learn that my body has limitations, and it's something to be listened to and honored, not something that you disparage and suppress. And so being on the other side of those experiences, I've really had to just completely have an overhaul of my worldview as it pertains to success. And so now I would say my vision of success is a lot more holistic than it was. It allows for grey, it allows for growth and process. It allows for journey, which I think is something I didn't think much about when I was younger. It was all about destination for me. But yeah, in concrete terms, my personal definition of success is for me to be connected to my body and be at peace with it. So not fighting with my emotions, but listening to them and seeing what information it's giving me and thinking about how I can deal with it, how I can manage it in a healthy way that promotes a sense of safety, both in my body and in the world, which is something that can be lost when you're struggling with your mental health and experiencing mental health crisis. And then also not living in survival mode, which is kind of like it's somewhat like psychobabble, but I think it's really helpful because when your brain is in survival mode, all your energy is just spent on preserving you in the moment. You don't have the energy to think ahead and plan and even dream because your body's just focused on just getting by. And the versions of Black excellence that I knew didn't they didn't account for that. They didn't even tell me that it was possible. It was quite traumatic to learn the ways in which my body can respond to stress, um, and how I just kept pushing myself when I really needed to just stop. And so I'm speaking a lot about being embodied and being connected to your body because it really, really matters. It's one of the things that you take for granted until you lose it. And I've definitely learned my lesson, and I'm very, very grateful and thankful to God that I've been able to recover in that way. But it's not a joke when you lose your sense of self in a very, very tangible way. And so beyond that, my vision of success is, as an extension of my experience, it's to fulfill my mission to create a trauma-informed society, because I think there are so many ways in which people and institutions responded to me at various points in my journey that, had it been otherwise, I might have recovered a lot sooner, or even better, I might have not fallen into crisis the way that I did, if people knew what I was going through, and if they understood, if they had the knowledge, to be able to identify when someone is in a state of, like PTSD or something, or if someone's slipping into depression. If people had a greater sense of awareness around these issues, I believe a lot of people wouldn't slip through the cracks the way I felt that I did. And in a practical sense, I want to earn enough for my family and I to be comfortable, but then also earning enough to be like a philanthropist with a capital P, right? One of my favorite personal slogans is "My healing will be my legacy." So when I say that, I mean it's about being holistic, not just wealth, but also in the behavioral patterns that you leave behind. So yeah, that is my long-winded definition of success.
No, I love it. I love it. Yes, I love it. Just even just listening to you say my healing will be my legacy, that is not a small thing. Because a lot of us, we are the product of, yes, strong people, but also legacies of brokenness. Legacies of, those that needed healing and did not have access to it. They did not have the freedom to even say, I need healing. And so, yeah, I think that my healing will be my legacy it's freeing in and of itself. Like you said, it is not just monetary wealth, but the wealth of being able to live in oneself. And I think that's also great too, because I feel that a lot of us, just because of the way society in the day and age is, we are not encouraged to live in the moment. I remember being young and saying, I live 10 minutes ahead because I'm always thinking about what's next, and feeling like, oh, like that's good. But obviously in growth and maturity learning, that's not good, because how much am I missing about myself, but also about what's going on around me, because I'm so focused on what's next. And, as we know from the word, but just also from life, we are not promised, not tomorrow, but also the next second. And so it's like, why not live fully in this moment that we have been given, as opposed to, looking to and planning. And I, say that relatively, yes, nothing's wrong with planning, but planning for a moment that is not promised to us. And then lastly, I just wanted to say, when you speak of the talented 10th, we know W.B. Du Bois was a great man, but even that idea that only 10% are worth success, only 10%. And so even coming out of this idea that, at least something that I maybe have taken on often, is, oh, this person in history is esteemed, and so this is right. And it's like, no, this is a human being in the same way that I am a human being, and I can disagree. I can take what is beneficial and leave what is not. And so I love that. Another thing that you wrote was, I don't like that it took me randomly coming across this or that resource or person or program to help me get better. When it comes to mental health, timely treatment is imperative. And because I've lived it, I know there are systemic, institutional, and sociocultural obstacles to access it. It doesn't have to be this way, and I'm determined to ensure that it doesn't continue. That moves us into me wanting you to expand more on your mission. So again, one of the things that I find super powerful that can be found on the website is your mission, that you have 4 points. You say that this is fourfold. And so I'm going to read the 4, but I want us to specifically focus in on the 4th one because I think we've talked about the others going through. So number 1, you said your mission is to create a safe space for young Black people affected by mental illness and or adverse childhood experiences. Many people will know that as ACEs. Number 2, to foster a supportive and stretching network that centers and celebrates the people and achievements overlooked by popular narratives of Black excellence. Number 3, to make psychoeducation more widely accessible and culturally relevant to Black people. And lastly, number 4, to provide a platform for which to advocate for culturally nuanced trauma-informed services, systems, and institutions. The reason why I want us to hone in on this 4th point is because this culturally nuanced trauma-informed services is it's just real, like it does not, this is one of the things that you mentioned in your intro article, is trauma is something that we all, as a human race, we all face. And yet it is okay to, even in acknowledging that, also acknowledge that there are specific cultural nuanced things that affect the way that we end up potentially broken in some ways. And so, yeah, I wanted just to dive deeper into that. So, yeah, I'd love to have you elaborate on that.
Yeah, sure. So you've pretty much touched on the heart of what I was trying to communicate in that 4th mission point. But so for me, as a Black British African woman, specifically Nigerian and Sierra Leonean, but mostly Nigerian, I think about the experiences that I've had that are unique to my culture that I wouldn't be able to communicate with a person outside my culture, but even more specifically, white people. Like, there are things I think that Black people get, regardless of where you're from. But when you start talking about it with someone who doesn't share that cultural experience or knowledge, it can be a bit tricky. And I say the exception to this is perhaps my therapist, who is a white woman, but she's very, very like understanding and supportive, and she's different in the best of ways. I'm very grateful for her. But I think about how, like for instance, who can you talk to when it comes to mental health, and most of the mental health services are coming from a white context. Yeah, I think most of our institutions, if you live in the West, are very much developed by mostly white people. At least that was how things have started. Obviously, things are changing now, but talking about, for example, Black spirituality and how that affects some people's experiences with mental health. I think specifically of the ways in which some forms of spirituality can actually be both a cause of trauma and also a hindrance to recovery. Like in certain Pentecostal traditions, if you're talking about your health in those contexts, you tend to believe in the power of the tongue in a way that is different to orthodox understandings of the Bible about those things. And so because you're so cautious about your words, you can be hesitant to even be honest about your pain because you feel like you're confessing things over yourself. And so at that level, you're already not able to own what you're struggling with. So how can you get help if you don't even acknowledge that there's something that you need help for? Secondly, what they do instead in some circles, they attribute it to the devil. And so if the cause is the devil, then the treatment looks like, I don't know, prayer or deliverance and things of that nature. But on a very, very real day-to-day level, they are still perpetuating destructive patterns, and they continue because there isn't that sense of accountability. Everything's just attributed to the devil and demons, and so when you don't have that sense of awareness and acknowledgement of what you're going through, you can't seek help because you don't think you need help, or the help that you think you need isn't adequate because, in my opinion, it's a misdiagnosis. And I think about how when you have these kinds of experiences, if you're coming from this kind of a context, I feel like oftentimes it's it's a very toxic situation. You're not getting the help that you need because if everyone around you from your cultural background thinks the same, then everyone is misdiagnosing and misattributing the causes of things. And so I feel like a lot of the mental health content that was out there, even though, so I have to be fair and be honest and say, for example, books like The Body Keeps the Score, I don't remember reading anything explicitly relevant to the Black community. And that wasn't a problem because it was just helping me to build the language of trauma, which was helpful. But then immediately, and this is how Bounce Black came to be, I started to think about the cultural applications of that. And as I looked around me, I couldn't really see anything that spoke to my experience and the way that it has impacted me. And then not just myself, the people that I've met along the way who we have these conversations behind closed doors, but we weren't aware of anyone doing anything about it or trying to reach out to our communities to be helpful in that way. And so when I talk about culturally nuanced trauma-informed systems and services, I think there's definitely a wave and a move to make things trauma-informed. I'm seeing it. And it's my hope that that continues. But as it continues, I think application matters. Like I've seen programs and events and services for people from Asian communities, for example, who experience trauma from things like honor culture and honor killings. So I saw how that kind of culturally nuanced service was being offered there, but I don't want to say that it doesn't exist for Black people because I'm sure that it does. Someone somewhere is doing something, and I follow a few people on social media now, so I'm aware now that people are doing things about it, but it wasn't reaching me when I needed it and where I needed it. So part of what I want to achieve with Bounce Black is to be part of the drive to fill in those gaps in in provision of the services and systems that are helpful to us because they speak to our experiences.
Yeah, no, I love that, especially when you're speaking specifically, yes, spirituality, religion, big in the Black culture. And so, yeah, I can really appreciate the thought process behind, how different denominations or understandings, it honestly makes me think of in John 9, Jesus is basically, he comes upon this blind man. His disciples are like, what did he do? What did his parents do? And he's just like, no, none of those things. And so I often find comfort in the fact that that's not how I feel like Jesus would approach this. Like he has equipped different individuals with talents and abilities to be able to benefit others in a way that it's like, no, I can pray there were doctors in his day in the same way they are now, and that doesn't mean that it is a sin to go to someone and have that as well. So you wrote, the brain, like any bodily organ, needs time to heal. And obviously, that is just super poignant because we don't often look at the brain as a muscle that can be overexerted or it can be damaged and needs healing. And so I appreciated that. And some of the stuff that you were mentioning that I wanted to like move over into this question is this shared experience. And again, as I am on social media following Bounce Black, as I am on the website following Bounce Black, I sense this shared experience of Blackness. Again, like you said, we all have differences. We even have different cultures within Black culture, which is important to acknowledge. Yet and still, it is a beautiful thing for me to be like, wow, this is kind of coming from a Black British perspective, and yet my Black American self am able to glean from it because there are similarities amongst the differences. Was that purposeful, kind of talking about that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think for me, I've always kind of just had a global mindset. Like thanks to my parents who raised me to think beyond what's in front of me. Was fortunate enough to travel from a young age, and most of my childhood summers, and actually also my adult summers, have been spent in the US. And using social media from a young age, I've just been able to meet and build friendships with people from all over, but especially the US. And some of those relationships were the ones that I leaned on when I was too depressed to leave my room and so I met my need for connection virtually. And so those bonds were strengthened. And through those friends, I learned more about the history of the US and the reality of life there as a person of color. So I've always been in close proximity to Americans, but then also the Black history that I was taught at school, strangely enough, was mostly African American history. And as a Black British person, I'm having now to be a bit more intentional about learning about Black experience and the Black diaspora elsewhere, even Black British history and like Nigerian history. But when it comes to my own quote unquote Black awakening, I experienced this in university, and it was very much influenced by African Americans. I mentioned that my university was predominantly white, but it was diverse enough for me to constantly be meeting international students, including students from HBCUs. Um, I started reading powerful and evocative Black American literature like Frederick Douglass, Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, read Malcolm X's biography, watched several documentaries. I heard stories about police brutality here in the UK, but also in the US, through the Black Lives Matter protests on campus. And I've visited places like Newark and Chicago. But yeah, all of this left a really strong impression on me about social justice, and I saw how our experiences and struggles overlap in many ways. But I also saw and was able to better appreciate that Blackness hits different depending on where you are in the globe sometimes. And that's important to acknowledge, especially when we talk about what racism looks like here in the UK versus there in the States. But yeah, I've felt an even stronger sense of connection to African Americans since I've begun learning about my maternal Sierra Leonean ancestry. As I've learned more about my great-grandmother, who was Creole, which is one of the ethnic groups of Sierra Leone who are descendants of liberated slaves, as well as the Saro people, who were also freed slaves who migrated to Nigeria from Sierra Leone. Yeah, all of these things together, I'd say, have definitely shaped the language that I use to frame my mission with Bounce Black. Yeah, and I'd say it's definitely the overflow of my learnings about Black experiences across the globe.
Yeah, I love that. Context definitely is everything. And I think sometimes it is maybe not as championed or lifted as high as it should be, but there are nuances and differences even to the Black experience. And it always has been, but oftentimes, even now, we still kind of find ourselves even clumping ourselves. So others outside clumping us, but us clumping ourselves. And so, yeah, I think that, yeah, this acknowledgement that there are similarities, but also the context of how Blackness is experienced. Yeah, that is super important. So kind of lastly, I want to hear more about Bounce Black. I want to hear about your future aspirations for it. You mentioned earlier about just thinking through a potential future family and how this would impact that as well. And what does your team look like? Because I do think that it's crucial that you were mentioning, like, you are not like a licensed psychologist or therapist, but in the midst of that, you have this team that has helped there. So I want to hear about your future goals and yeah, what does the team look like now?
Yeah, Bounce Black is a peer support community. And I think it's important for me to emphasize that, because as much as the part of advancing psychoeducation means leaning on expertise, but I really wanted to highlight that we are living this. And when I say we, that includes the people who are the experts, so to speak, in the team. And so with that said, the Bounce Black team is currently a nice and cozy quote unquote family of four, with myself as founder and chief curator. And then my friends, so Dr. Vicky Onyeka. Sorry, I know someone somewhere will shout at me for anglicizing her name. I think it's pronounced Dr. Vicky Onyeka. It's an Igbo name. Sorry, Vicky, if you hear this. But yeah, she's a junior medical doctor. And yeah, she knows the reality of trying to navigate these issues whilst managing and building a career in medicine. Yeah, and also a friend of mine called Mapalo Chanda, who is a mental health counsellor. And last but by no means least, Chinedu Ede. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, but again, they're probably going to shout at me if not. Anyway, he is a clinical administrator who is training to be a counsellor. So, as I mentioned on the website, even though the team consists of doctors and counsellors, they aren't people's doctors and counsellors who come to use Bounce Black. So it's very much a peer support thing. They're just on board to ensure that what we put out is accurate and yeah, it does the work that it needs to do. And in terms of future goals, wow, I'm still actually thinking through this every day because something new develops and shifts my thinking. But I'd say on a broad level, man, I'm really inspired by Dr. Joy Harden Bradford, who is the founder of Therapy for Black Girls. Shout out to her. I should also mention she's played a huge part in my story as well. That podcast has just been incredible for my own personal journey. But yeah, I admire her in many ways just for how she's built this global movement of women, Black women, doing the work of healing. And I so admire that. And so I would love to be able to impact people in a similar way by making sure that I reach the target audience, which is people who are navigating professional life and their education while struggling in this way, really trying to make sure that I both work to fill the gaps, but then also reach the people who've slipped through them. I think that's really important for me. Yeah. I just want to build the community. That is my biggest focus. Like it really is people oriented for me, because I know the difference it makes when you feel like part of something, when you feel like a core member of a group, when you feel like you belong and you feel safe. That is the foundation for any kind of progression and flourishing. And so that is the goal at the high level. The specifics are going to look different over time, but that is really the goal and aspiration for me.
I love that. Yeah. So, with all of that being said, I wish you the best. I am excited to go along as a spectator, just being able to take in what you're doing. But also, I want others to be able to do the same. So, letting us know where we can find you. But then also, you guys have apparel, which I think is amazing to be able to not just take this in, but also wear it as a statement. And so, tell us where we can find Bounce Black.
Yeah, sure. So main place would be the website bounceblack.org, and on social media, so that's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. So for Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, it's I Bounce Black, so there's an I in front of it. And then I think on LinkedIn it's probably just Bounce Black as the company name. But yeah, that's how you can find us, and through the website you will be able to find the link to the shop where you can buy some meaningful merch to wear it as you live it.
I love that. And again, yeah, the blogs that you put up there as well. Just in case, I'll spell it out: BOUNCE, Black, BLACK, and that is .org. Yeah, again, thank you for sitting down with me. I think that this is, yeah, I need better words, but it's amazing. It is amazing what you are doing. It is amazing to be able to see you do it. So I am constantly inspired. And as I said before, just really adamantly and excitedly looking forward to all that lies ahead for you. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Honestly, it's been a great honor to speak here with you. I'm a huge fan of Heartoedify already. Like, I've just been listening to all the episodes, and just before we started recording, I was singing her own jingle to her. I won't do it now because I'll butcher it. I'm not as great as the singer as Astrid, but yeah, I love what you're doing as well. I admire what you're doing, and I'm so thankful that you would consider me to speak here with you. Thank you so much.
Of course, not even a question. Well, yes, I appreciate it. And yeah. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of Here to Edify. New episodes drop every Wednesday and can be found wherever you listen, now also on YouTube. Thank you again, and hope to catch you listening next time.